Let's jump right into this. Welcome back to another explainer, where we take fascinating sources and break them all down so we can see exactly how the world works. Now, I want you to think about this for just a second. What if I told you that by doing something as absolutely absurdly simple as removing a single olive, a massive company was able to rake in an extra $5 million? Can one olive really make $5 million bucks? Look, I know exactly what you're thinking. You're sitting there thinking, okay, that sounds like an absolute lie. It sounds like one of those exaggerated internet myths, right? Like a rumor passed around the corporate water cooler, or a fake fact you just scroll past on social media. Because, we're so conditioned to believe that massive financial returns require these massive, disruptive ideas, a crazy new product line, a revolutionary app, a brilliant marketing campaign. But what's so fascinating here is that this olive story, it's completely true. It absolutely happened, and it quite literally redefined how massive corporations think about the whole concept of scale. So, to understand how this is even mathematically possible, we've got to ground this unbelievable premise in reality. Let's travel back to the United States. The year is 1987, and our protagonist in this story, American Airlines. At this specific moment in time, American Airlines wasn't just a big company, they happened to be the biggest airline in the entire world. We're talking thousands of employees, hundreds of aircraft, and flying millions of miles every single year, moving massive amounts of people across the globe. And see, when a company is operating at that gargantuan size, the traditional rules of business kind of start to warp. The scale is so massive that the smallest, tiniest things become magnified. We're going to look at one incredibly tiny decision made inside a boardroom that completely changed the fortunes of this massive corporation and actually set a precedent that almost every major company follows today.
Section 1. The 1980s Airline Crisis.
Okay, to understand the whole olive thing, you really have to understand why the airline was so incredibly desperate in the first place. This company was under immense pressure during this turbulent decade, literally being squeezed by three massive threats that could take them under. First up, expensive fuel. The cost of just keeping their massive fleet of metal tubes in the sky was skyrocketing. The oil market was incredibly volatile, leaving permanent scars on their operating margins. Second, intense competition. The airline industry had just undergone deregulation, which basically meant the government was no longer artificially controlling routes and prices. Suddenly, the market was absolutely ruthless. You had these upstart budget airlines slashing prices and stealing customers left and right. And third, zero profits. Despite being the biggest airline in the world, bringing in massive revenue, they were bleeding cash. At the end of the day, they were making absolutely no money. Enter their CEO, a guy named Robert Crandall. Crandall was a total workaholic, fiercely dedicated to his business, and he knew that if they didn't figure out how to stop the bleeding, the biggest airline in the world was going to collapse. So he issued a strict, non-negotiable mandate to his team. Check every single tiny thing where money could possibly be saved. Leave absolutely no stone unturned. Right, so his executive team immediately starts doing the math on the big traditional expenses. Fuel, staff, tickets. But honestly, nothing worked. They scrutinized all the major obvious costs that go into running a massive global transportation network. They looked at changing flight routes and adjusting altitudes to save on fuel consumption. They looked at staffing overhead, freezing hiring and renegotiating with unions. They overhauled ticketing processes and maintenance schedules. But despite all of this heavy lifting, they just couldn't find the necessary financial relief to save the struggling company. The big levers simply weren't moving the needle enough. The margins in the airline industry were just too razor thin, and let's face it, all the obvious fat had already been trimmed away. Every airline out there was trying the exact same big strategies, and it just wasn't enough. They needed a totally different approach to survival if they were going to make it out of the 1980s. Which brings us to Section 2, the math behind the olive. So the executive team is completely stuck. They've hit a wall with the traditional spreadsheet cuts. Until one day, they experienced this fascinating aha moment during a routine in-flight meal review. Picture this. The executives are sitting around looking over the food service, specifically those premium, highly curated meals served to their highest-paying passengers in the first-class cabin. Well, someone on the team noticed a completely unnecessary garnish sitting right on top of the first-class salads. They were putting one extra olive in every single salad bowl. It wasn't the core of the meal. It was literally just sitting there to add a little pop of color, which leads to this incredible, simple directive from the CEO himself. Remove one olive. Yep, that was Robert Crandall's instruction. Naturally, his team laughed. They actually chuckled, thinking it was a bit of dark corporate humor. They're like, "Sir, what is that actually going to do? We're losing millions, and you want to take a single olive out of a salad?" But Crandall didn't back down. The room went completely silent when they realized he was entirely serious. He forced his team to actually sit down, pull out the calculators, and run the exact numbers on that single, solitary piece of food. And here is where things get wild. 3 cents. I want you to emblazon this tiny starting number in your mind. That one extra olive, added entirely for aesthetic reasons, just for looks, doing absolutely nothing for the taste of the meal, just adding a tiny splash of color, costs a mere 3 cents. Now, when you're running a multi-billion-dollar airline, 3 cents seems like a joke, right? It feels like a rounding error on a rounding error. It feels like a complete waste of an executive's time to even discuss it. Why on earth would you spend an hour in a boardroom talking about 3 pennies? Well, let's walk step by step through the compounding math that turned that 3-cent garnish into an absolute fortune. Step 1, we start with our 3 cents per olive. Now, step 2, in 1987, American Airlines wasn't just serving a few dozen meals. No, they were serving a staggering 200,000 meals every single day across their last global network. And that right there is the magic of operating at global scale. So step 3, when you multiply that tiny 3 cents by 200,000 meals, and then you multiply that by 365 days in a year, suddenly you aren't talking about loose change in the couch cushions anymore. You get $500,000 saved per year. That is pure bottom-line profit generated without having to sell a single extra ticket or lay off a single employee. And finally, step 4. Over 10 years, that equates to a staggering $5 million in savings, just from one single olive that no one was eating anyway. This brilliantly illustrates why this exact scenario became one of America's most famous business case studies. It perfectly demonstrates the hidden power of scale. When you do something millions of times a year, even a microscopic change compounds into massive financial leverage. It's literally a case study that is still taught to aspiring executives at Harvard Business School to this very day, proving that sometimes the best solutions aren't massive overhauls, but tiny, tiny adjustments. Section 3, the cost-cutting mindset. So what was the real-world reaction to all of this? When the newly designed, slightly lighter salads rolled out onto the planes, did passengers riot in the aisles? Did they write angry letters demanding their olive back? No way. The customers didn't even notice the missing olive. They had absolutely no idea it was gone because their core dining experience hadn't fundamentally changed at all. But for the struggling airline, that massive influx of financial relief allowed them to finally breathe. And more importantly, it triggered a massive ripple effect throughout the entire company culture. The initial olive removal was really just the catalyst. Once they saw the compounding math actually work in the real world, American Airlines started looking for other micro changes everywhere. They shifted their entire operational mindset from macro cuts to micro efficiencies. They began removing other tiny, seemingly insignificant things across the entire flight experience. They shrank the physical size of the napkins given out with drinks. They reduced the number of ketchup packets handed out with meals. They even looked at the weight of the paint on the outside of the planes. They realized that massive corporate savings are often hidden in micro reductions that the end consumer will never ever notice, but that compound beautifully on the balance sheet. And the absolutely crucial point here is that this wasn't just some quirky trend from the 1980s airline industry. Just take a look at modern corporate giants like Amazon and Apple. Every major company in America today still uses this exact cost-cutting mindset. When Amazon designs a cardboard shipping box to be just half an inch smaller, they are saving millions in cardboard and shipping space across billions of packages. When Apple stops including a charging brick in the iPhone box, they aren't just saving on the plastic, they're shrinking the box so they can fit thousands more iPhones onto a single cargo ship. The philosophy remains perfectly intact and highly relevant today. Small decisions equal big money. It is a fundamental, foundational principle of modern corporate efficiency. Which brings us to our final section. Section 4, business brilliance or customer betrayal. So I want to leave you with this final provocative question. Are you team olive or are you team money? Was removing that one olive a stroke of undeniable business genius? Was it just smart efficiency, cutting out ways that no one cared about anyway? Or was it a subtle deception, a betrayal to the paying customers in first class who paid thousands of dollars expecting a premium, fully garnished experience? This is really the core debate of what we now call shrinkflation, and it literally all started with a single olive. I want you to force yourself to choose a side and let me know down in the comments. Drop a team olive if you think they should have left the premium experience alone, and drop a team runny if you think Robert Crandall did the exact right thing to save his company. If you enjoyed learning about these incredible business stories, make sure you're subscribed. In our next explainer, I'm going to break down exactly how McDonald's made $1 billion just from their French fries. You definitely won't want to miss it. Until then,